I've had a very long Friday, there has been a crap ton of news today, and I got a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it. We'll start with the misinformation. Up until this point in time, I have been tracking the Japanese sales numbers. I've been using Famitsu sales to track all of those numbers. Anybody that tracks sales in Japan will know that Famitsu sales is very reliable. Due to exactly how reliable they actually were, I based a lot of my conversation on that. Here's the problem, however. Nintendo sold 1.27 million units in Japan. This is based off of today's financial reports. Now, these are sell-in numbers, not sell-through numbers. We need to distinguish the difference between those two things because we're going to mention that a lot today. Sell-in numbers are made up of what Nintendo gives to distributors, plus anything they sell directly, basically My Nintendo Store. So for example, if Nintendo was to take out 10,000 units and send it to Best Buy, and Best Buy only sold 9,000 of those 10,000 units, then the sell-in number would be 10,000 and the sell-through number would be 9,000. Okay, so Nintendo, up until the end of June, so that's what, the first 25 or 26 days of the Switch 2's launch, they claimed the sell-in number for Japan was 1.27 million. Now, Famitsu Sales has their own data. They calculate sell-through numbers, so these are actual products that made it to the customer's hands. They go based off of data they collect from all of the big retailers around Japan. As of June 29, which is one day less than what Nintendo provided us for the first month number, they're saying that 1.4 million Switch 2 units were sold to the people of Japan. But this 1.4 million also doesn't include whatever was sold on the My Nintendo Store. So by all assumptions and all calculations that had been made over the course of the past month until Nintendo decided to release this 1.27 million number, all of the experts and analysts assumed that the Switch 2 was selling much better in Japan. And I took it at face value because historically these people are pretty reputable. I'm not going to make any assumptions about Famitsu sales, nor am I going to make any assumptions about the numbers Nintendo is providing us. I'm going to let this topic sit for a second to see how Famitsu sales adjust their numbers in the following weeks. And this is not something that I myself have decided out of nowhere that I would be analyzing. If you go through the various Nintendo nerdy forums, there's a lot of people who are saying that Famitsu sales was clearly over-tracking the Switch 2, and they're curious to see how Famitsu sales responds to this. Either they drastically screwed up because they made claims that the Nintendo Switch 2 sold faster than any other console in Japan, but with these updated numbers, it no longer holds that record. The Game Boy Advance would still hold that record unless somebody was to say otherwise. Or it turns out that Nintendo decided to change what they consider a Japanese sale and shifted some numbers to the rest of the world. Because what everybody is also surprised about is how much better the rest of the world is doing, and those are numbers they assumed would be for Japan. So there's clearly some kind of discrepancy here. I don't want to make any conclusions. The only thing I can do is take it for face value for what Nintendo is providing and assume that they're not fudging the numbers. But this is definitely something that I will be keeping an eye on over the course of the next few weeks. And it's very important for me to keep an eye on because if it turns out Famitsu sales is wrong, then my hypothesis that most people were buying this thing in Japan is incorrect. But I was going based off numbers that everybody was talking about with how good the Switch 2 was doing in Japan. Turns out it's just doing average. And if their number for Switch 2 sales are wrong, I don't know what's right about them anymore. They could have incorrect PS5 numbers. That console could have done better. They could be wrong about Donkey Kong Bonanza. It could have done even worse than it actually was because they overestimated the Switch 2 sales. They probably overestimated all of the games that were sold for the Switch 2 as well. So either they're just going to make a quick adjustment or they're going to come out and defend their case. I don't know exactly how this works. Like I said, I'll revisit this point if anything comes of it. If nothing comes of it, then we'll just have to move on from the discussion. Okay, so the next big talking point is Mario Kart World. You're going to be hearing a lot of people tell you and shrug and be like, all the geniuses said that Mario Kart is not a system seller. Once again, they're being very short-sighted. If I'm not mistaken, the reports are showing that a vast majority of Switch 2 units that were sold were the bundle. Almost overwhelmingly so. In addition to that, when the Switch 2 launched, the only brand new game that was available for the Switch 2 was Mario Kart World. So if somebody was buying a Switch 2, realistically speaking, they were going to be buying Mario Kart World. And naturally, if they were going to be buying a Switch 2 and Mario Kart was available for only $50 if you got it as a bundle, many people wanted that bundle. It just makes logical sense. And as such, Mario Kart World has been a runaway success. But pretty much every other game on the Switch 2 library has underperformed. If you add all of them together, they don't come even close to the numbers of Mario Kart World. We technically still don't have the data for Bonanza either, but I imagine if it was doing great, Nintendo would have said something. Now, let me make something very clear. I haven't been completely against Mario Kart World as a launch title. I think if you go through my videos, I wasn't one of the people that were like, this is the wrong launch title and people aren't going to buy it. The argument that I did make, however, was that a lot of people are going to be buying the Switch 2. And when they want to buy the Switch 2, whatever game you throw in with there is guaranteed to overachieve because it's going to be the bundle. And as we saw with the Nintendo Switch, people naturally hovered towards Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. It didn't need to be bundled. It came in on bundles, sure, but the majority of sales, the vast majority of sales of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe were not based off of the bundle. I am of the opinion that Mario Kart World would have sold very well regardless, even if you didn't bundle it in. So the only point that I ever tried to make a few months ago was that if you were to just sell Bonanza as the bundled title, now you get two titles that are doing phenomenal. Because everyone's going to be like, I want to get the Switch 2. Bonanza is only $50 if I get the Switch 2. And then, well, I got to get Mario Kart because I got the Switch 2. The issue is Nintendo wants to make Mario Kart a bigger deal than it is. And it's already a massive deal. That's why this is so absurd to me that they think like this. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the Switch 1 had what? 1 in every 3 attachment rate, maybe even better than that? They're so obsessed with the way things look on papers, on the charts, that they had to bundle it in to make sure it's even higher than 1 in every 3. And they want people to look and be like, see, like 99% of people bought Mario Kart World. That's how good this game is. $80, bam. Whereas in actuality, if they had done Bonanza, all of the Bonanza bundles would have sold as much as the Mario Kart World ones. And realistically speaking, most of those people that bought Bonanza with the Switch 2 are going to go out of their way to buy Mario Kart World. So instead of one game at like a 98 or 99% attachment rate, which I think is what World is sitting at right now, you would have one game at like a 80% attachment rate and the other one at like a 60% attachment rate. And again, this is not me belittling Mario Kart. If anything, this is me saying that I believe that Mario Kart could achieve this greatness or close to this greatness without Nintendo holding its hand and trying to guide it to levels to make it seem like it rivals GTA 6. But now with the way the numbers look, it almost feels cheap. Because at this point, it's basically a pack-in title. And the problem is you didn't buy the console because of the pack-in title. You bought the pack-in title because you were buying the console. For example, people didn't go out and buy the Wii because they wanted the Wii. They went and bought the Wii because they wanted Wii Sports. It's a very different dynamic. But that being said, Nintendo did a phenomenal job getting Mario Kart World out there, and it's been a very successful game, and I am not going to take away from that. I just think it's hilarious that they're doing everything in their power to make everybody hate the game now, but they did a good job getting into people's hands. They also did a terrible job getting people to want to buy third-party titles, which is what I've been saying from the beginning, of course. And that could be because of the game key cards. It's probably a lot because of the game key cards, but it's also because it's a Nintendo console, and, well, yeah, people buy this for the first-party titles. That's why Mario Kart World has a 99% attachment rate. But yeah, let's move on to the next point. Let's look at the worldwide sales. Again, let's talk about sell-in numbers versus sell-through numbers. I'm going to refer to sell-in numbers as units that are shipped. They include the My Nintendo Store sales, but it's just easier to make it simple. The sell-in numbers are what was shipped. The sell-through numbers are what was sold. Now, so far, the only numbers that we have gotten from Nintendo as far as sell-in numbers are concerned is the 5.82 million units that were shipped in the first month. In most consoles cases, the shipped number and the sold number are the exact same. And it's because when something gets shipped, it gets sold almost immediately. But as we all know, the Nintendo Switch 2 has been fairly available since it was launched. I'm convinced that a vast majority of Nintendo Switch 2 buyers never tried to buy anything that was in demand the way that the PS5 was or any GPUs were. Because every time one of them says that the Nintendo Switch 2 is hard to get, I'm convinced this is their first time trying to buy something that's remotely in demand. The Switch 2 has been the easiest console to pick up since it launched in probably 20 years. So I'm convinced throughout this entire thing's first 2 months of life, the shipped number has been much higher than the sold number. Not enough to dramatically change the way that this thing actually performs in the long run, but enough to have a worthy discussion on. So Nintendo basically says that in the first month of the Switch 2's life, they shipped 5.82 million units. Conveniently, they don't mention how many were actually sold in that first month's life. And you can say that Nintendo never says how much they've actually sold through, except the problem is they've done it twice already. After the first 4 days, they estimated that 3.5 million units were sold through. Not shipped, these were sold to the customer. And in addition to that, they've said that at the 7-week mark, they've also sold to the customer, they estimate 6 million units. Conveniently, in both of those cases, they don't give you the sell-in number, they only give you the sell-through number. Now mind you, as far as ship numbers are concerned, if they're sitting in a Best Buy warehouse, they're still considered shipped. And Best Buy has their own metrics to determine when they should get it out on the shelf. But as far as Nintendo is concerned, that's something that was already sold. Many analysts predicted, based off of shipping numbers and based off of just data that they collected, that there was 6 to 8 million Switch 2 units readily available at the start of the Switch 2's life. That's why, and it's very important to keep reminding Nintendo fans of this, many people were predicting that the Switch 2 would have absurd numbers on the launch weekend. A lot of them were talking about 6 to 8 million units sold. You can look up 6 to 8 million units and just go through the forums. They're all there. They only moved the goalposts after the console launched. And they extrapolated that idea in their mind where they're like, well, if they're going to sell 6 to 8 million units in the opening weekend, that means by the end of the first month, they're going to have maybe hit Wii U numbers. And once again, look at the forums. Just search how many units will the Switch 2 launch, and you'll see so many crazy predictions in all of these Nintendo forums. And now they'll tell you nobody was actually in their right mind saying that, but I know, and you know, and we were all there. We saw these conversations. So remember, they're going to keep moving the goalposts. Now, I'm actually of the opinion that those 5.82 million units were shipped immediately, and all of the stores were slowly selling through them, and they were basing how many units are needed in each location based off of the demand, and a lot of these units all around the world were just sitting on shelves and not moving yet. Remember, this isn't just about the United States, this isn't just about Japan, this is a worldwide number now, and there are a lot of people in Europe and a lot of people in Canada who say that the Switch 2 is readily available on shelves. And we don't have sold numbers for all regions, we only have shipped numbers. So this means that Nintendo shipped out 5.82 million units to the launch of the Switch 2, and they only managed to sell 3.5 million in the first 4 days. Now here's the kicker. If they actually manage to get through the 5.82 million units, which is what Nintendo fans will have you believe, that means through the first 25 days of the Switch 2's life, they managed to sell 5.82 millions, and then over the course of the next 24 or 25 days up until like July 24th or something, which would be the 7-week mark, they only sold 180,000. And I think that's very unrealistic. That would be an unprecedented drop-off for the month of July. On the other hand, if it was so out of stock and so hard to grab through all of the rest of June, it's possible that they only managed 1 million sold in June. That 1 million plus the 3.5 million would be their numbers for June, which would allow you to have 1.5 million sold through July. The problem here is that would imply that the Switch 2 never hit 5 million units in June, which is what everybody was predicting it would get. So given that we know that the Nintendo Switch 2 is at 6 million units as of July 24th, and 3.5 million units as of the start of its launch after the 4th day, it's safe to assume that either there were more units available in the first month and it had a massive drop-off in July even though there were more units shipped, or the Switch 2 did not have that good of an opening month outside of the first 4 days, and it started making up for it in July when the consoles became more readily available. So this discussion is going to be very circular. Realistically speaking, if you extrapolate out the numbers, it's like 380,000 units sold a week, and I got that by taking the 6 million, minusing the 3.5 million, which leaves us with 2.5 million, dividing it out by 6.5 weeks because we're taking out those first 4 days of the launch, and that gives you roughly 380,000 units sold a week. Really, it's basic mathematics, but what I've seen very simple-minded people call it online is mental gymnastics. If you assume this thing sold at a steady rate from the day that it launched until we got to the 6-week mark, it would be at 4.88 million units, which is not absurd, like it's close to 5 million, but it doesn't hit that 5 million mark. And that's the number that VG Charts and all of the analysts and experts believe that it hit at the 1-month mark. That's why everybody was dancing about 5 million sold in the first month. Now, for me, I don't care if it's slightly less than 5 million or slightly more than 5 million. We had already accepted this thing was roughly 5 million. But what we know for sure is that it's not up to 5.82 million. It's not like 5.5 million, because that would imply that July has been terrible. And I doubt July has been that much of a drop off. Like I expected by the end of July, we'd be at 7 million units. And it seems like right now it's going to be closer to 6.5 million. So again, we're still in a good spot. And before I get accused of moving goalposts, I've been saying this thing should steadily sell another million units per month for the next few months. As a matter of fact, I think it was the last video or the one before it where I said, realistically speaking, by September 30th, I'm expecting between 7 and 8 million. So 6 million at 7 weeks doesn't bother me. That's on pace with what I expect. But it bothers Nintendo fans because they want to believe that this thing hit 5 million in the first month. And it might have. But I'm of the opinion that if this thing had hit 5 million sold through units through the end of the first month, Nintendo would have made that very clear. Instead, they rounded all the way up to the 7th week to say that they've sold 6 million. And once again, with that 6 million, they never said how many were shipped. So for all we know, all of those units that are out there that nobody is buying could very well be another 1.5 million. And they'll get sold, but it'll be very slow. But whatever the case, you have to remember with these shareholder reports, Nintendo has to deliver this in the very best way that they can. And that's not just Nintendo. Every corporation, when they do these reports and when they have to post stuff online, they have to deliver it in the best package. That's why they're very careful about how they share the information, because depending on how you deliver that information can change the perception online. So right now, I have zero proof that the Nintendo Switch 2 managed to actually sell 5 million units in the first month. And even if they hit 5 million, they've had such a slow July that they've only managed to get to 6 million now. And even if it's over 6 million at 6.1 or 6.2 million, that all doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, I'm expecting 7 or 8 million by September 30th, which is in 2 months from now. And again, the haters are gonna say we're moving goalposts, but these are discussions that we've been having from the beginning. From my predictions before the Switch launched, I think I actually made a video where I said, realistically speaking, if Nintendo changes nothing, I still expect 30 million units sold. That's if they change nothing. I think it's hilarious if it could end up being a Wii U situation, and I've always said that, and I still think it would be hilarious, but it's not realistic. The gaming industry is too big, the competitors aren't doing jack, and the Nintendo fans are aplenty. And honestly, 30 million units is a very respectable number for a pro console. So if it managed to do that, then I would say Nintendo was very successful with the Switch 2 because they effectively did what they've wanted to do from the very beginning, which was extend the life of the Switch 1. And they are not moving on from the Switch 1. And that couldn't be clearer than the information we got today that the Nintendo Switch library is not only going up in price in Canada like we had expected, but it's going up in price here in the United States. And we got a hint for the prices because Target accidentally updated their website early, and maybe after it was shared online, they decided to backtrack and they removed those numbers, but we have an idea. On August 3rd, these are realistically the numbers that are going to come up. You expect me to believe that a company that projects only 4.5 million units sold for an outdated console is not trying to extend the lifespan of that console? Maybe they're not trying to sell significantly more Switch 1 units, but they don't need to. They're already out there. They want to sell more of the library of that Switch 1. They have successfully convinced everybody out there that the Nintendo Switch 2 is the next generation Nintendo console, but it's not. It is just an improvement of the current generation. And it's not like what Sony does, because Sony makes it very clear. This is the PlayStation 5, this is the home menu, this is the color scheme, this is the price. Nintendo has made synergy between the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 at levels that are extremely similar to the new 3DS and the 3DS families. There are a few games that are going to be exclusive, and a lot of games are going to be running better on that hardware. That's the Switch 2. They're more focused on keeping the Switch 1 library up there so they can continue to sell the old games. And it's not just the last gen games. It's the games that were released 8 years ago in the last gen that are still at full price. And now they're charging even more for those games in a lot of regions, and that's going to hit the United States soon too. Watch. So yeah, I think even if the Switch 2 stops at 30 million units, it's still going to be considered a great success by Nintendo standards because the Switch 1 games are still going to be running and getting sold, and they're going to be making new games for that console. And not just that, they've now moved up the price of the Nintendo Switch so much that even if somebody was considering going to the store and buying the budget console, it's no longer the smart buy. You're better off now paying the extra and getting the Switch 2. With these price increases of the Nintendo Switch 1, Nintendo has officially lost its last bit of humanity. I don't think there was much left, mind you. It's not like I'm thinking there was like hope in saving them or anything like that. But for me, that is the last straw. And then Nintendo fans are going to run around and be like, well, this is what you get because you voted for Trump. No, dude, this is what we get for voting with our wallets. This is what we get for giving Nintendo leeway, for allowing them to do whatever they like because we decided to support them like the idiots that we are through 8 years of the Nintendo Switch 1's life. This has been coming. And in my opinion, this rocky, slippery slope started right around the time where they decided to convince everybody that by not increasing the price of the Nintendo Switch, they were doing people a favor. That was step one. When everybody was saying the Nintendo Switch has been out for a few years now and we expect it to go down in price, Nintendo somehow got the narrative out there that because they didn't increase the price, that was effectively a price drop. And the fanboys ate it right up and ran with it. So what do you expect now? They're going to eat up the costs of these tariffs for those 4.5 million units that they're projected to sell over the next fiscal year? You expect them to eat up the price of the tariffs for that additional dollar that they added to the price of the amiibo? The digital titles that they're selling online, they've increased the price of those. The tariffs are awful on a global scale, but it's not just the tariffs. It's Nintendo taking advantage of a situation. The same way they took advantage of everybody during COVID, they're taking advantage of everybody now. and they have been testing the waters all throughout the past half decade or so to see what they can get away with. And seemingly, with today's decision, they believe genuinely that they could get away with a lot. And honestly, at this point, I'm starting to think they might, because they would not be this stupid to increase the price of the Switch 1 if they don't expect that the Switch 2 is going to be a runaway success. So despite the fact that I think the 5.82 million units is expected and not as special as people are trying to make it out to be, despite the fact that I think that at 7 weeks, 6 million is not impressive enough for a console that's as available as the Nintendo Switch 2 is, and despite the fact that they've sent out surveys for the game key cards, they haven't gone and charged $80 for another game, they've backpedaled on the updates for Mario for the Today app, and all of these other signs that were very clear to me at one point that maybe the pushback is working and the backlash is getting us somewhere, I've crumbled all of that hope out and I've thrown it out the window. Nintendo believes they will succeed, and the greatest proof to me is that they think we're all suckers, they think we're all idiots, and they think we're all going to just eat up the fact that they're increasing the price of the Nintendo Switch 1. And we're not even going to blame them, we're gonna blame Trump. That's what they think. That's what they believe. That's how little they think of every single one of you that is giving them a dollar. I made 2 posts earlier today. I was very excited to come into this video and talk about the 5.82 million units and the 6 million units sold at 7 weeks, because I actually don't think it's that impressive. It's in line with what we've been saying for the past 3 or 4 weeks. But when I saw that they increased the price of old hardware, and then I looked online and I saw Nintendo shills, and I don't use that word often. I don't call you guys fanboys. I don't call them drones. I don't say shills. Not that often, at least. I try to contain myself. But there has never been a clearer sign to me that people out there are genuinely pathetic than when I saw how many people defending the price increase of 8-year-old hardware, while in the same breath applauding Nintendo for how successful they've been with the record-breaking sales that they've made. Let's make this very clear, and this is me on August 1st, 2025, after effectively pushing back as hard as I can for the past 4 months. With the increase in price of the Nintendo Switch, I am now officially convinced Nintendo has won. And if Nintendo wins, that means the customer loses. But not all buyers of the Switch 2 deserve enough respect for me to refer to them as customers. Customers bought the Switch 2. Those of you out there that are defending Nintendo, you guys are consumers. And consumers do not buy. Consumers engorge. Nintendo won, customers lost, and consumers engorged.